Hi, welcome to Promote You. This is a living education portal where entrepreneurs and artists who have had to live and die through their ability to promote themselves come to teach me and you, my audience. Now, we've got new interviews every week. Today, I'm introducing you to the author of I Did It on a Dare. He's a comic. Oh, give me 1 second. I got something going on. Sorry. It's Alan Martin. If you're watching live, please comment with any questions you have. If you're not watching live, please make sure to subscribe. Please make sure to comment so that we know what's going on. And here's Al Martin. Hey, Al, how are you?
Doing?
I'm great. How are
Some
you?
of the issues with live production, huh?
Yeah. I'm sure you've been dealing with them for a little while now.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. So, what were you doing before you became a stand-up?
I was actually selling burglar alarm systems, and before that, I had one of the largest lie detection companies. A complete different world for me. I was doing lie detector tests for big corporations, and I had my own practice. Like Tiffany's, Cartier, when they would want to hire an employee, they would send them to me,
Huh?
make sure I got their whole background and that they weren't gem thieves or anything like that. And I actually did it for A&S, Macy's, a whole bunch of companies till I got legislated out of business. They passed an anti-polygraph law where you could not do polygraphs for pre-employment purposes, and therefore, yeah, the only ones you're allowed to do now is if there's a specific theft in the place. And surprisingly, it was President Reagan that signed it into law in his last years in office because he had something he wanted, and Ted Kennedy, who sponsored the legislation, had something he wanted. So they did some old-fashioned horse trading and figured for the couple of thousand polygraph examiners in the country, screw them. There's a lot more votes elsewhere. So, which turned out to be a great thing, in hindsight.
It just took a little while to get there. I've read up a little bit on your background. When you first started doing stand up, how many years did you have to work towards just getting on stage without having to bark your way in?
Well, back then, stand up was a lot different than it is now. There are so many more opportunities for comedians to get on stage. Some of them, not to toot my own horn, but some of them which I created myself. Things
Mhm.
like interning, things like barking for stage time, things of that nature. But when I started, there was only 5 or 6 clubs in Manhattan, and you had to basically bring it to get on. It was the Improv, Catch a Rising Star, Comic Strip, Dangerfields, and I think Caroline's was in it a few years already, and Stand Up New York was about 2 years old when I got into the business. So, it was starting to open up. And it was very funny because a few blocks away from me, they opened up a club called Rags to Riches,
Okay.
which wound up going from riches to rags within a year or two. They had spent they had spent like $600,000 to build this beautiful club, like 3 blocks away from my little dumpy New York Comedy Club. They went out of business. New York Comedy Club went on to comedy history.
What was their mistake? Did they put too much money into the front side and not enough into getting people in? Or
Well, yeah, exactly that. They put a lot of money into building out the place. And this happens quite frequently, Steve, with restaurants.
yeah,
Restaurants open up with great concepts, no clue how to market them, and then they open up and they go, it's one of the most dangerous businesses to invest in because there are so many restaurants that, unless they have a real good marketing expertise, they're going to be in for trouble. And also, I think I was fighting for myself. It was my business, my place. That place opened up, as do a lot of comedy clubs nowadays, opened up with numerous partners. And when you have a lot of partners, you think that the spigot is unlimited for money, and you're spending other people's money, and sometimes you do it rather stupidly. And I had to conserve every dollar I made. I had to think very, very on my feet because it was my money, and I didn't have a lot of it. So
Absolutely. I think a lot of people go into business just thinking about where they're going to spend money to make money, as opposed to just trying to figure out where's my money going to come from. It's a huge problem.
a huge problem. And
I
I
don't know
and I
why.
think I thank the fact that when I was sitting in college and I was taking marketing courses, that was my major in college. I always
Oh.
thought to myself, well, what the hell do I, like we all do in college? What do I need to take this stupid class? And years later, it benefited me in figuring out how to market my business.
So how many years did you do stand up for, and how many years have you been doing the owning of the clubs? And was there
Well,
a crossover? Were you owning clubs and going on stage at the same time at any point?
it was fairly rapid because I started in stand up, and almost within about a year, I latched on to a guy who was producing comedy shows around town, and I started helping him out. I would get there a little early. I would set up the microphone, set up the
Hmm.
stage. It was in a restaurant, so the stage had to be brought out of a storage room, and I had to set it up and set up the mic and set up the sound checks, work the box office, seat the customers, and that's where I really got a lot of the experience in terms of running an actual room, which I eventually wound up moving to opening my own room. Because what happened is I started doing that for a guy, and he broke his leg, and I was doing all that for nothing, and his leg being broken went on for about a year. So he had me basically working for nothing in this room, setting it all up, and I later found out that he was all this time was running a music room downtown. So he was running a music room downtown. I was booking the shows and doing everything, and I getting paid. And one day I said to him, "Listen, dude, I don't mind to continue doing this, but it's either I'm going to do it for myself somewhere else, or you let me in on the action." And he wound up letting me partner with him, and then the story went from there. I mean, that was my first room, and what happened was at 48th and Second, not 48th and Second, 42nd and Lex. We were running a room at Houlihan's, and as the story goes, and it's in the book, I show up one night with about 60 reservations to do the show, and all of a sudden the guy says to me, "No show tonight. Can't do a show. Last night we had a reggae concert here. The place broke out in a riot. The management decided they don't want any more produced shows. So now, on an hour and a half notice with 60 reservations, I had to go running up to Second Avenue. I kept one person nearby at a payphone because there were no cell phones back then. I wrote down the phone number of the payphone, ran down to Second Avenue, started looking for bars, and found this place on 48th and Second. And I sweet talked the guy into doing the show. Later, I found out the place was dying; they had no business, so they were glad to get me 60 customers. And luckily, one of the comics on the show was also a waitress. So she said, "Hell, I'll make a lot. If you give me a spot on the show, I'll waitress the room and do a spot." And that's what we did. The guy was so happy that night. He said, "Yeah, come back next week." And that began a 5-year run at that location on 48th and Second, and we called it New York Comedy Club.
And then eventually you moved on from New York Comedy Club to Broadway Comedy Club and to now Greenwich Village Comedy Club as
Right.
well.
Well, New York Comedy Club made one more move. We
Hmm.
moved to 24th and Second, where it still stands today. And then in late 2000, we were the first club to start the process of having two showrooms at one location. So we opened the second showroom at New York, and then I discovered Florida and decided to open up a New York comedy club in Florida. And then Broadway came in around 2003.
Okay.
Yeah, Broadway came in 2003. and eventually, but that club opened as the Improv.
Okay.
Improv Comedy Club, and later on became Broadway. And that whole story, without giving away too much, was in the book.
Okay, good. Yeah, don't give away too much from the book.
No.
Yeah, I just want to get a little bit of your life story before we get some tips from you on self promotion, just so people
Sure.
kind of know what you've been through. For people that have come in so far, if you have any questions, feel free to write it into the comments. We'll make sure that Al answers them, as long as they don't impugn his legality. And please subscribe. Al, running one comedy club must be very difficult, very stressful. But running two, I don't know. I don't know how you have any hair left.
I don't. One
Um,
time I was running three, and we, basically just ran out of kids because one of them wanted to go into a different line of work, and it became too much for me, and we wound up selling New York Comedy Club in 2014, and then I kept the two locations, one in the Village and one in Times Square, the
okay.
Broadway in Times Square.
The only one of your kids I know is Dina. She's wonderful. It's funny to have you on because every time you come up in conversation, which is often enough, it's New York comedy. I go, oh yeah, I'm at his club a lot. I've never met Al before, and they're like, oh, he's the nicest person, smartest person in the room. So thanks again for coming on.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the compliment.
Yeah, you're welcome. Dina says hi, Stephen. Hi, Dad. Hi, Dina. How are you?
Hi, Dina.
So gives us a good background as far as where you've come from and where you've come to, and of course you've got the book out now. So what I'd like to learn from you is about self promotion, and maybe we can start out from some things that you learned when you were a stand up comic.
Sure.
You had to do a lot of crushing, backbreaking work, getting the audience in yourself. That was you.
Yeah.
When you were first going into that, do you feel like you were really strong at that, at selling people on the street to come into a comedy club and watch the
Yeah.
show?
Yeah. My marketing background helped, and I would stand a lot of times at Grand Central Station, which was right across from 42nd and Lex. And as people were coming in to start their evening in Manhattan, I'd sell them on the show that we were doing right across the street, and so I'd get the audience in, me, myself, and one or two others, and then we'd go on stage and do our thing. So, I think that back then it was a little more difficult to self promote. You did not have social media, which helps a lot. Social media has its ups and downs, but certainly to promote yourself, and with all the different platforms out there, it allows a lot of people to get around what was traditionally in the past the gatekeepers. If you
Yeah.
wanted to do radio or you wanted to broadcast, you had to get a job at NBC or CBS or any of the local radio stations. Now you got a camera and you got a mic, and you're on Instagram Live, you're on Facebook Live, you're on YouTube.
I don't know any comics that don't have some form of a podcast at this point. They basically just have to. So you mentioned the location. Location's always very important for when you're promoting things, knowing
Absolutely.
where to be. Did you see a lot of other comics that were trying to do this, just picking really bad spots, not knowing where to be to find the people?
Well, I don't think there were there. It's a very rare breed to find people out there that are have the creative side to be comics, but also have the business side to be business people. Um, One that I think of off the bat is Vinnie Brand, who's built two very successful clubs, one in New Jersey, one in Connecticut, and he's a very good comedian as well. Chris Mazzilli, who owns Gotham Comedy Club, very few people know, but he was a very good comedian starting out. He worked for me in the early 90s and then went on to open Gotham. So, but it's very rare to find that, people just either want to put their energy into being a comic or they put their energy into being a business person. Um, it's very rare you can get someone that can do both.
What traits do you find between you and those two other guys, Vinny, and the other gentleman you mentioned?
Super hardworking. You have to be super hardworking. You have to. You have to have a sense of humor. Obviously, you have to make people laugh. Um, Chris, sometime in the late '90s, once he opened Gotham, I think made the decision that he was just going to focus on his club. I made that decision a little later on in the late '90s, a little after him. I'd be on stage sometimes, Steve, and I'd be watching the audience, and I'd see, oh, what that guy doesn't have a drink, and that person hasn't been seated properly. They sat him all the way in the back when the seats up front. And so I find myself on stage trying to run a club when I should just be focusing on comedy. And then I made the financial decision saying, hey, there's just more money in the running this club thing than being a comic for me at that stage of my life. I didn't feel I was going to get the acting role. I didn't think I was going to get a sitcom, and I really didn't want to be on a cruise ship making good money or flying to colleges. I didn't think I had an act that was suitable for that. And that's where you make the real money: colleges, cruise ships, corporate work.
Sure.
So I made a calculated decision. I had a young child at the time, Dina, and I said, you know what? I have to concentrate on being a business owner. That's where I would have more potential.
You mentioned these guys are all hard workers. You're a hard worker. It's very important. What about people that you see that start out lazy and you watch them go from lazy to hard work? There has to be a few situations where that's happened. Have you ever seen that happen?
Well, I think if you focus on stand-up comedy, you're going to have to work hard to succeed. I
Sure.
mean, um, a person I think of off the bat, Jim Gaffigan. I mean, this guy did 62,000 sets a week. I mean, he just goes and does sets and did sets and did sets, and that's how he got better. So, and probably had a day job. I don't remember, but
Yeah, it came
he
from
had
finance.
right. So, you know, there are comedians that have done some very successful things in their day jobs and then make that decision at some point to just focus on the comedy. I can't tell you how many lawyers there are that are comedians. Dan Natterman comes to mind. Eric Deskin out on the West Coast comes to mind. So there are a lot of people that I think Greg Giraldo was an attorney at one time.
Really?
I could be wrong,
Okay.
but he might have been. So there, Al Bell. I don't know if you ever heard of Al Bell, who's had like a million Tonight Show appearances, was an attorney. So there are a lot of great comedians that were attorneys but that's the toughest kind of way to make it because when you have a good day job and you are successful, it's very hard to, and you're used to a certain lifestyle. It's very difficult to break out of that and pay the dues that it takes to become a successful stand-up comedian. That's why if you read the book, one of the golden rules I have is travel light. The less you have going on in life, the more likely you are to succeed as a comedian because you have the time, the effort, the energy to. You could stay in a club till 2 o'clock in the morning, waiting for maybe someone not to show up so you can get 5 minutes on stage. Whereas someone who's got to be at a day job the next day, they're not going to put that kind of effort and dedication in. I get a lot of comics, and then the second thing of that is there's always been sort of a little bit of a difference between comics on the road and then comics in the main comedy clubs in Manhattan and LA.
Sure.
They call them road comics versus city comics. Whereas in the city, you'll make less money, but you have a better chance of networking and getting seen for something and getting heat on you, as opposed to working in the middle of nowhere, Scranton, Pennsylvania, or Ohio, or all these gigs. You'll make a little more per gig, but you might not go anywhere in the long run. And so you got to think, where what works best for you is really what you have to think of, and how you can get there. I mean, there's a lot of ways to succeed in comedy. You can, but it does take a lot of hard work. I mean, no, I compare it to baseball. When you see Derek Jeter hitting, 300 something for his career, Derek
Sure.
Jeter just didn't wake up and become Derek Jeter. He had to spend a lot of years in minor league ball, getting up early in the morning, playing catch with his dad, college ball, triple A, double A, and then make his way up to success. Same thing with a comic. I mean, there's just hundreds and hundreds of sets that you have to do, and it is easier nowadays because there are more places and opportunities to get those sets than they were in the 80s and early 90s.
We have a question coming in from a Brooklyn comic, Rebecca Kaplan, friend of mine, and it was seconded by a Manhattan comic who's also an Amsterdam comic, Ariel Dundas. I just like mentioning she's from Amsterdam. They'd like to know, what can comedians be doing right now during the pandemic to get noticed by clubs and club bookers?
I think it's a real good time to get your video out because get those links out because, quite frankly, I would answer for myself. I got more time on my hands. I wrote the book, and I'm working with a writer that's adapting it for a screenplay for a potential movie. But I still have time on my hands, and it's a lot easier now for me to say, okay, I'll watch that video. Look at the level of people that are doing podcasts as guests. You have certain comedians that probably when they're working and, things are back to normal in the clubs, certain podcasts wouldn't be able to get these guests because they're busy making, a lot more money per gig, but now they're sitting at home and they need to stay relevant and they're out there promoting themselves.
Uh, there's a New York City comic and producer who has an Instagram live show every Sunday. He's actually having one of the stars from Breaking Bad come on to his Instagram live because it's not just the comedy; it's everybody has free time. It's
Right. So
insane.
this is a great time to be doing those podcasts. And if you have any talent at it and you get those good guests, you really can build up your listenership.
Yeah, and again, thank you for coming on to my show. I'm
My
glad I can
pleasure.
take advantage of the pandemic that way.
Yeah.
Al, on the other side, I'm sure you've seen a lot of comics come in with all the talent in the world, and I'm not asking you to name any of them, but they come in with all the talent in the world, and then they just never make anything out of themselves. What are some of the pitfalls that you've seen in business and also in stand-up comedy that people fall into that you want people to avoid?
Well, I always tell comedians and I tell people who teach classes when they ask my opinion or thoughts that anything I can add to my class. I always tell a young comic, produce a show. As part of your training, produce a show. And then you'll get to see the owner's side of things. How comics sometimes call you at the last minute, I'm not showing up. Or if it's a bringer show and the comic says, I'm bringing 30 people and they show up with nobody and still want to go up. So I always tell people, produce your own show so you can see the mindset of the person on the other side and avoid making those mistakes that is going to piss a club owner off. A lot of little things can piss a manager or a club owner off. You come in, you block the showroom door, having a conversation with somebody, and the wait staff can't get through to serve a drink. I've known some managers and club owners that go absolutely ballistic when they see something like that because it's showing no regard for how the venue makes money to be able to pay the comedians or to be able to pay the electric bill or the rent, which in Manhattan is no small feat. So I say, make yourself, if you're going to approach a club, pick a club that you like to work at, that you enjoy the atmosphere or the vibe, and just try to stay out of the way and make yourself useful. There's nothing wrong with even going to a manager if the club seems to be overwhelmed at a particular moment and ask them, can I help you with anything? Can I help seat a room? There are some people that walk around, oh, I'm not kissing ass. And you know what? Sometimes kissing ass can get you somewhere in life. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And I
I
mean, I
kiss
don't think
ass if I have to.
Absolutely. I don't even look at it as kissing ass. Like, it's just being a good human being. It's being helpful. I don't know why people are so nervous about that. Something that
Well, they think they're being rebels, and they think that, oh, I just want to make it on my talent alone, Yeah, go ahead, make it on your talent alone and spend an extra 5 years doing that. I mean,
So would you say a good personality might be worth more than talent starting out for
yeah,
a
listen,
comic?
if I have two acts in front of me that I got to book,
Hmm.
one of them is 80% funnier than the other guy. In other words, 80% the talent of the other guy. One guy's 100%, another guy's 80. But one of them is nicer to deal with, easier and more understanding. Oh, I got to cut your time by 5 minutes. You're doing a 20-minute set. I got to cut it today because one of the acts ran long, and there's 100 people piled outside waiting for the next show, and they're accommodating. That's great. I'll give you a story without naming the comic. So one comic runs into my room one night, says,
Hmm.
Al, I'm running late. I screwed up on my sets. I got too many sets. One place ran long. I'm going to miss my next set. Can I go up before the next comic that's booked after me? Go up in front of him. And the other comic didn't mind, so I accommodated him. He gets off stage and he spends 30 minutes at my bar bullshitting with some girl that he's trying to pick up. So I'm thinking to myself, what a jerk off. This guy is sitting there, rushed me, threw the whole balance of the show out because the act that was before him was more low key and easier going. And he was a very high energy act. And now I had to put the high energy act up first and the low key act after him. And it totally destroyed the show. It wasn't fair to the other comic. Also, he can just, sit there at the bar. I thought he was going to get paid, run out, and go to his next set. He sat there for 30 minutes trying to pick up some girl, So that put a bad taste in my mouth on that particular comic.
Absolutely. That's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, it's what we call chutzpah, I mean, so it's not a good thing to do.
So, a concept that keeps coming up with all of these interviews is relationships and the importance of building relationships.
Absolutely.
I think it's something that's very hard for a lot of people. In fact, Rebecca just messaged, what if your comedy comes from being naturally off-putting to talk to? Because Rebecca herself in real life can sometimes be a little bit off-putting, though she's a wonderful person. Um, how do people learn to? I'm going to get in trouble with Rebecca for that one later. How do people learn to build relationships if they're not good at it? What can they do to get better?
Well, it's interesting because most comedians off stage are not very sociable people, and they're very awkward in a lot of ways. And one of the things I talk to comedians about when I do talk to them privately, I'm asked to watch certain showcases, is I always get people to tell me I'm way beyond open mics. I don't do open mics. And an open mic's not the worst thing in the world because not only do you get an immediate opportunity to get on a stage, but I always tell people open mics are more important for networking purposes. There are a lot of people that you'll come through the ranks with on open mics that if you keep a good relationship with and you get along with them, if they somehow get a break somewhere, they get a gig somewhere, they need a driver, and you have a car, maybe they'll ask you, look, can you drive me to this gig? Maybe you can ask the owner of the club if you can squeeze me on for 5 minutes. There's a fascinating story in the book, and really people should read it. If you're a comic and you want to know how to network, there's one point in the book that I talk about how doing one crappy gig wound up getting me so much work and so many credits that it was incredible. And so I never use anything you have to try to get ahead in the game. If you have a card, you can drive a headliner to a weekend gig. By all means, do it. If you're a graphic artist and you can find a producer or a club that needs flyers, do it. Is the other person exploiting you a little bit? Yeah, but you're getting something you want. And a lot of times performers don't understand a very basic a very basic concept, and that's
Hmm.
quid pro quo. I'll do something for you, you do something for me. It works for both of us, and we both can get something out of it. And that's where interning comes from. Interning became very popular in the journalism world and broadcast TV newsrooms, and we started it in comedy clubs where people have done seating for me, helped out with things in the club, and eventually they would get stage time at night on a regular 9 o'clock house show. And I can't tell you how many comics started that way and have gotten great stand-up careers out of it.
As far as getting to become an intern, how does somebody go about that? Do they just reach out to the club, say, "Hey, I'm
Yeah,
interested"?
just go to the contact page at Broadway and Greenwich Village Comedy Club, and contact the venue. Most of the emails go actually to me, and then I pass it along to Eric Hansen, who runs our intern program, and Melinda, who runs it over at Greenwich. So, it's my daughter Melinda. So I think interning is a great way, and not enough people think about it or want to do it or take advantage of it.
I actually did improv comedy back in Chicago 15, 16 years ago and got to intern at IO. And I ended up meeting a bunch of different improvisers there that are now on TV that, I'm Facebook friends with, I can message with and say, "Hey, what's up? I'm doing this
Exactly.
now." Yeah,
You
it's
never know where this is going to lead. And,
absolutely.
never. And it's very difficult for comedians. I get it, because on the stage, that's our world, and we control it and we are at our best. And when we come off stage, you know, sometimes we can't put two words together, but you have to make that attempt to be more sociable, because, there's an old saying, you got to be in it to win it. You got to be socializing to move forward.
Sure. So I want to make sure we talk about your book. It just came out. It's got 5 stars on Amazon. I just purchased it. It should be to me tomorrow or the next day. What made you decide to write a book? Did someone reach out to you? Did you have a story and you said, "I got to get this out"?
Well, the pandemic certainly helped. For years I've been putting the stories aside and writing them down in folder. And when the pandemic came, I suddenly found myself, once I got done with, working on the PPP loans and all the other things and closing down the clubs, and then pivoting to starting to think about getting them ready. But in between, I had a period of time with nothing to do, and that's when I really pushed the book and got it going and got it to an editor, and the editor did a good job, and that's where we're at. We got the book out.
Did you have a relationship with the editor beforehand, or did you reach out through
Well,
a?
I knew the editor. I did know the editor. The editor actually is also a playwright, and she's done some shows. Um, uh, Mostly down in Florida, but she did off Broadway shows in Manhattan. And I've actually performed in a couple of her shows that she had. So as an actor,
Is is this person Ginger Ryder?
yeah, Ginger Ryder.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. All right.
yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
So Sheba's mom. Okay, great.
Yes, she was mom.
Fantastic. All right. Wonderful. So, as far as people that are writing books that want to go and get them published, do you have any advice for people that want to get in but don't have a relationship with a publisher? Are you able to talk
Well,
about that?
again, nowadays, a lot of the gatekeepers of the world are sort of collapsing. You can get yourself self-published on Amazon. I think Barnes and Nobles might have that opportunity, and you can get self-published, but there are other venues other than Amazon that you can do too. So self-publishing is definitely an option if you have a story to tell, but it's got to be a story to tell. At the end of the day, people are not going to buy a book about, you picking your nose in a cubicle somewhere for 40 hours a week. You got to have something, I think, inspiring to people, And what I love about my book, when I describe it, I just say Rocky Balboa meets stand-up comedy, because I
You,
was the ultimate underdog. I was a guy that, nobody would have given, my competition when I first started out never gave me a thought, and most of them are gone.
I was
Most of
going
the
to say
club
you're.
owners of that era are gone. There's maybe three left, and everything else around me has changed.
What is it? Well, first off, I just want to say I think you're a lot smarter than Rocky Balboa. That's unfair to you.
Hey,
Um,
thank you.
you're welcome. What is it about you and those other two club owners? Is there anything that the three of you did that you recognize that's kept you all going?
You mean Vinnie Brand and Chris Mazzilli you're talking about? Or
You said there's only two other clubs that are still open since you
well, yeah.
started.
One of them is Caroline Hirsch, with Caroline's, and I assume a good divorce settlement helped her out. And Tony Bavacqua over at Dangerfields is still around, and that basically is he has a great name at that club, and he's been around a million years. And then the people over at the comic strip. And yes, the Comedy Cellar too. Actually, the family's been around. The father started it, Manny, and then the son now runs it, the Gnome.
Okay, cool.
But most of the clubs, Stand Up New York, has changed ownership. You know, and,
Yeah. No, it's a very difficult business. I would say probably just as difficult as a restaurant. I think most restaurants, 50% of restaurants close within the first year. I can't
yeah.
imagine what the numbers are for stand-up comedy clubs, but it can't be easy. Um,
Well, they seem to hang on, some of them, because they have multiple people investing, and when one of the investors gets done, they're able to find someone. It's like a vanity business. Someone that always wanted to maybe own a club, and they want to hang out in a place or get away from their wives or something like that, and they get into the comedy club, or they wanted to be a comic themselves. But there's never been a shortage to find people to buy a comedy club or a percentage of a comedy club.
So, just going back to your book, you've got 5 stars on Amazon. Like I said, right now, a lot of people are talking about it on the internet. There were a ton of different articles about the book. How have you gone about getting the information out there?
Well, I used all the social media platforms, Instagram. Um, we have an extensive mailing list for my clubs, Broadway Comedy Club and Greenwich Village Comedy Club. We sent out uh, an email blast, getting out to those people with promo codes. And we're planning a book signing in New York when I get back, and hopefully hitting some comedy club, not comedy club. I'm sure other clubs don't want me there signing books, but I'll be doing signings at my clubs and some local bookstores.
As far as social media goes, what social media platforms did you use to get this information out, and what social media platforms do you use in your personal life?
I probably fall in the cat. I try to use none of them for anything other than business,
Sure.
because I can't take. There was a time I would talk politics and stuff. I forget it. I can't be bothered with it. It's just too much fighting, and nobody's ever wrong. And no, I don't think anybody's ever said on social media, I'm going to think about that. You might have made an interesting point, and debate it rationally. Right away, it becomes incendiary, and I just don't have the time or the desire to get involved like that. But I primarily have used my own personal page, my comedy club's personal pages on Twitter, uh, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm told I'm too old for TikTok.
I just started a TikTok account and it's been very painful. But I talked to Liz Mealy and Justin Herman a little bit, and they're having insane success. They're getting more followers through TikTok than they've ever gotten through any of the
Really?
other platforms. So you might You might want to reconsider that and learn some Fortnite dances for the kids.
I might have to get a filter and maybe a hair filter or something and try to hit the TikTok. I'm not against it, you know.
They have a ton. I mean, and the great thing about, the Broadway Comedy Club TikTok is you can just have different performers take it over for a day and post videos on it for you guys, promoting themselves and promoting you. So that's great.
Very cool.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the great thing about being a club is you've got all these people coming in, so you can just switch it up. Between Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, which of them has been the most effective for getting word out about the clubs?
I actually it's actually one I forgot to mention. I love LinkedIn.
I've been hearing great things about LinkedIn for getting info out about shows. How do you use
It's a
that?
funny thing with LinkedIn. LinkedIn, I never really, I would just get a notice. This person wants to join your network on LinkedIn. I would accept it.
Sure.
And one day I turned around and I think I have close to 4,000 LinkedIn connections. So I said, you know what? Let me start utilizing it. And actually, you might get less responses, but you get very quality responses. Like
Okay.
you'll find a group that wants to do a fundraiser for business purposes, so they call you back, or someone wanted to buy. Someone wanted to buy. I sent them a free copy of the book. He loved it, and he wanted it to go to his employees as a motivational thing. So
Okay.
he bought a whole bunch of copies. So I mean, LinkedIn is a very good platform. I've had, less people respond, but you get a lot more bang for your buck. Like when that one person does respond, they respond big time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another important thing that I haven't really talked about on this show is they call them whales on TV. I don't know if they really call them whales in business, but you try to find this big catch, this big fish to
Yeah.
hook in and bring into you. How do you make sure that you're not dealing with a tire kicker that's just trying to waste your time?
Well, that's a little research could do that. If some person does respond, there's one or two that I've heard of actually, and so I knew they weren't tire kicking. But it's like when someone gives me a Facebook friend request, I just don't accept. I go to their page, and if it's like three pictures of just them in selfies, and they joined and they were, born in 1999 or something, and they're, from Nairobi, I don't think they're going to have a lot in common with me. I don't even know why they're reaching out to me. So I'm worried about hacking. So, I don't get involved in it. But I check people's Facebook pages. Now it's a little more difficult because a lot of people haven't done stand-up comedy in 3 months. So you have to go back in their Facebook feed to try to find out, is this person a comic and are they related to the comedy business? But then you start seeing some Zoom shows, and then okay, maybe they're in the business.
I've gotten really weirded out by Facebook. I only started doing stand up about a year and a half ago. And since I did, I get a lot of other stand ups that I've never met before sending me friend requests. And I feel like Facebook, no, if they want to follow me on Twitter or Instagram, I'll follow them back immediately. But for some reason with Facebook, it feels very weird.
Why is that? Why do you feel that way?
I don't know. Facebook just feels personal. I feel like it was originally supposed to be personal, whereas Twitter is just a place for me to put stupid jokes, and Instagram's a place I can just post pictures. So, it doesn't matter as much. For some
Right.
reason, Facebook just feels more personal. I missed a question earlier by Rebecca, and just to make sure I ask. You mentioned a great time to be getting out your videos. She asked, is there a good way to reach out to you or to get it
Sure.
out? Yeah,
Okay. Now write this one down
I'll
because
type it in the
sometimes
comments.
people screw it up. Al Broadway Comedy Club at gmail.com. Al Broadway Comedy Club at gmail.com. People will write down all sorts of variations. I'll put Al at Broadway Comedy Club gmail.com, or Broadway Comedy Club, Al Broadway Comedy Club at gmail.com, and that'll get to me.
Cool.
I
And
found I had to get it. I had to get a Gmail because you say AOL and people look at you like you're 90 years old.
it's
I got
very,
friends
very
still
true.
on Prodigy.
I loved Prodigy when I was 11. That was my favorite thing to be on. Al, just we got to the 45-minute mark. I'm going to bring you a little bit over because I have one last big question that I also didn't get to.
Sure.
Have you made, in your years of self-promotion and marketing, have you made any mistakes that you feel like you would do differently now when it comes to just those two things?
Yeah, I think that in my earlier years of stand-up comedy, owning a club, I think I could have been a lot nicer at times.
Okay.
I didn't follow always my own advice. I could have networked a little better. I don't know if it was my own insecurities at the time or the fact that I wasn't ever really good at socializing like most comedians. But I think somewhere a combination of two things. One is I got more successful in business. I started to like myself a lot better. And I think therapy also, almost 20 years of it, made me start to like myself a lot better. So I became a nicer person. I think if you talk to people during the very early years of me in the business, I might not have been considered as nice a person. And I hope, I didn't, I was born in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn people tend to be very blunt and very straightforward. And I really didn't use a lot of finesse sometimes talking to people and realizing, I never realized that sometimes my words can really fuck up people's heads, and I had to be a little nicer about what I said. Yeah. So I've tried to improve as a person through the years.
You seem like a very nice, kind person. I haven't heard anything about you being anything other than nice and kind, and it was very kind of you to come on today.
Thank you.
The book is called "I Did It on a Dare." How I built I should have written this down before. How I built a comedy empire in 30 short years. I'm doing that off the top of my head. Was that correct?
You were right.
All right.
There, How I Built a Comedy Empire in 30 Short Years. And if we keep going, the sequel will be How COVID Destroyed It in 3 Months. So.
Thank you so much for coming on, Al. I hope you guys will subscribe and like and comment. I put Al's email address in the comments if you want to send in your video. Al, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Take care.
Have a beautiful day. Stay safe and warm.